Alright, everything's ready from what I can see. Yep, let's go. Okay, the sound is off because I don't want the stream to be muted. I will make a quick VOD. This is going to be something like a 20-30 minutes VOD, and it's going to cover the changes to the masteries in Season 6. Yeah. Are you deaf? I can clearly hear bad Bulgarian music. Wait, what? Oh my god. Razum, please. But yeah, I didn't want the stream session to be muted, so I can actually upload it to YouTube. And with that said, I'm gonna put music on later though, but when I first need to, you know, finish what I'm already starting, so yeah. Alright, well, this is going to be interesting. So, as most of you are aware, this YouTube channel features a plethora of gameplay videos, but not too many about theory crafting. Actually, none to be exact. So this is going to be a slightly different video, and what I mean by that is I'm going to be going with an in-depth analysis for the masteries of Season 6, and the... Hey Link, what's up? And the changes. I will be discussing the meta shift and how it affects the AP mid laners. I will be discussing viable mastery builds. I will be discussing how that affects the order of item purchase, as well as proper itemization in certain situations. So with that said though, this video is going to be very different. I am using Twitch VODs, so basically I'm really bad at editing, and I have problems with editing videos in general, so I'm just using the accessibility and the ease of use of the Twitch VODs, and I'm just gonna cut this out and I'm going to upload it to my YouTube. And yeah, this is going to be somewhat of a podcast, I guess, because it's going to be covering a discussion about a certain topic which is in regards to the game and how the game is changing. So yeah, without further ado, let's get it started. First and foremost, I would like to say that there is a distinct difference in how the masteries work from Season 5, as well as how the builds work. So for example, there are interesting things like the piercing thoughts that are affected by the meta shift, and I will be explaining about this in a bit after I get to it. So let's start off with the first and foremost, the Sorcery. Now this is a very interesting mastery. Oh, by the way, if anyone needs a shortcut to anything in particular, because I will be explaining for at least a couple of minutes every certain mastery. So if you need shortcuts to stuff like this, you will basically find it in the timestamps under the window, which I will be putting after, I guess, when I have a bit of time. So without further ado, let's start with the tier 1 masteries, which are going to be the Fury attack speed, which is very counterintuitive to the mid lane playstyle, unless you're Diana or something, but you still want to get like it's the Sorcery, it's just no other way around it. And now we go for the Sorcery. So the Sorcery is really interesting. The Archmage talent has been removed, which is really interesting. So the 5% flat AP bonus has been removed. And they've introduced something which increases your ability power as well as spell damage. Now this is really interesting because in the early game and in the mid game you will have a huge damage boost. So on top of your ability power that's gonna scale up by 2% higher, the spell damage is going to scale for 2% higher as well. This means that your AP is gonna grow, but the base values of your damage of your abilities is going to grow as well due to the spell damage bonus. So for example, the 2% spell damage bonus are going to take both the AP bonus as well as the base values of the spell, which are already really high. So something like Viktor, for example, or Diana, or Ziggs, or whoever AP mage in the mid lane. AP mages by default have high base values in their spells, which means that the already high damage is going to be scaled up even further by this mastery. So this mastery alone is better than the Archmage in my opinion, and it's going to scale very well in particularly in the mid game. It's going to give you a much needed power spike, which the AP mages kinda lack right now, so yeah, this is really viable. Now the second thing that I'm just talking about from a Viktor's perspective, but this works of course for like any other AP mid laner. You can just take notes from this if you want. So the double-edged sword has changed a bit. It's much more beneficial for the melee champions at this point. It's really good for bruisers, fighters, duelists, a lot of mobility assassins and stuff like that. but it is really good for ranged characters as well. So for example, if you're playing against something like a survival slash farm lane, something like an Anivia, something like a Ziggs, something like a Zerov, then taking the double-edged sword would be good, considering you can dodge their abilities. Now if you're playing against a Lux, for example, it would be really good as well. And the 2% bonus damage is going to be scaled even further by your Sorcery. So it's going to be, if I'm not mistaken, multiplicative damage, and it's going to scale really well together. Your burst is going to be very, very noticeable in the mid and the late game. With that said, this is definitely not something that you would want to take against assassins and all-in champions like Zed, Talon, like Diana, like pretty much all of the AD assassins and a couple of AP assassins on the mid lane as well. And pretty much like stuff that can poke you down, stuff like Gangplank for example is very viable in the mid lane at this point. So something that's going to be really interesting is the change to the Feast. Now the Feast is really good, and this is going to be your level 2 bread and butter, pretty much the standard build that you're going to take. So this thing has been reworked. It's more consistent now, albeit if you use the old Feast, it's going to be much more powerful. So the mana sustain from this thing has been removed, which means that you will no longer get the 1 mana per kill, which is going to result in 6 to 7 mana per wave, depending on which wave it is, be it a cannon minion wave or a normal minion wave. So what this thing does is, basically if you delay the wave kill, if you delay the wave clear long enough, you can get up to 40 health back in a single wave. This is really good sustain, and it's a really reliable form of sustain if you're playing against assassins and someone that can push you hard out of the lane, something like a LeBlanc for example, Zed, Talon, Yasuo. Now the reason why this is so good compared to the old one, it has its downsides because it doesn't give you mana back, but it has its upsides, which I think are actually justify picking this over the, for example, the old one. So this thing is really good simply because it gives you a consistent amount of health back. What I mean by this is, with the old one, you needed to kill 5+ minions, so you can pretty much get even with this one. With this one, if you're under pressure, you need to kill a single minion and you will get 20 health back. This is really, really valuable, in a sense that if you're hard pressed under the turret or something like that and you're against an all-in champion, it's going to save you a lot of trouble. And they're pretty much going to deny you a lot of farm anyway, so you're not gonna make use of something like a 3 HP per kill of a minion, right? And it's a kill on a unit, so it works similar to how the dangerous game works. So for example, if you kill a champion somewhere in a skirmish and if you're ignited, this is pretty much going to save you the HP of half of a tick of an ignite, or 1 tick of an ignite, depending on how early the game is. So the Feast is definitely going to be your standard build. It's really, really good. Of course, if you can outmaneuver, the double-edged sword is going to be really good as well. Now the Vampirism is really good. The problem is that it's a percentage scaling ability. It is good into the mid and the late game, but the thing is that the low amount, it's only 2%, so it's not going to be that noticeable. And the problem with that is that the moment that it becomes noticeable, mainly in the late game, is the moment that if you get caught, you're pretty much dead. There's no other way around it. So Vampirism, while it is good on paper, it's definitely not as viable as the natural talent. So this is really good for Viktor in particular, simply because it allows you to scale your Q even higher, because it gives you a pretty decent amount of AD as well as AP damage. So the way this works is, by the removal of the Butcher, which gave you bonus damage on every auto attack, it actually switched the position. It's Savagery now, and you will not get this, and you will not get the Arcane Blade, so you will basically lack a lot of auto attack damage, which will somewhat make last hitting difficult for you, finishing off creeps that you didn't hit by your laser. So for example, this is going to make up for the difference. It has a really nice power growth, so this thing is going to allow you to last hit very well, and it's going to increase the power of your Q as well. So for example, this makes Gunblade builds very powerful, and I will be probably doing a video later on about this as well, and I'm going to cover this in depth, more in depth actually. But the way this works is it pretty much allows you to scale up your Q ability without even putting points into it, which is very valuable. It will allow you to somewhat equalize the damage between the laser and the Q, which will make for a very potent trade in the mid game, for example. And this is going to be pretty much your standard mastery pick. Now this is a very interesting choice and a very interesting path that Riot has taken with this one. So Bounty Hunter, for example, is a really cool talent. It allows for you to get a 5% bonus damage. And that's provided you can kill 5 unique targets. So for example, if you kill each enemy champion a single time in the whole game, you're gonna get the 5% flat bonus damage. Now this is really good, and usually you would take this one unless you're playing against really hard tanks and if you're behind, but there's no way that you would know if you're behind or not in the beginning of the game. So although this is more powerful, the Bounty Hunter, the Oppressor is actually more reliable. So for example, if you have a CC jungler, something like a what? Okay, something like a Lee Sin with the slow, something with the cocoon like Elise, something like pretty much a hard lockdown jungler or a slow jungler, or something like a Vi with the knockups and the and like the Q damage with the mini stuns and stuff like that. So the Oppressor is definitely a lot more viable. If you have Vi, for example, she's going to charge in, you're going to put a gravity field under the enemy, and it's going to pretty much allow you to get the 2.5% damage up front. So the Oppressor is really viable, it's really good. I wouldn't recommend taking it if you don't have a jungler that provides CC, or something like Master Yi, for example, or Rengar is good though, I guess. But Master Yi, for example, he's one of those champions that first and foremost he's not going to allow you to have a lot of pressure on the mid lane, simply because his presence is very low and he doesn't provide any form of CC for you. So Oppressor is definitely not going to be a good if you're playing with something like that. So this is really a personal choice, but depending on the situation, the Oppressor is a bit better in the early game, but Bounty Hunter is definitely really good if you're not falling behind, and in the late game, the mid to late game, if you're roaming a lot as well. So you need pretty much 3 kills, so it can break even with the Oppressor, and it's going to allow you to get 0.5% bonus damage on top of the Oppressor. So I would personally take the Bounty Hunter in most situations, and it's a really good choice. Both are really good. You won't go wrong with any of these anyway. So this is the thing that I wanted to discuss the most, the piercing thoughts. This is something really important, and it ties down with the meta shift currently. So for example, in this meta, it's straying away from the tanks, the pure tank meta, and we're entering a meta which facilitates the use of particularly AD carries, bruisers, fighters, duelists, high mobility assassins. So what this means is that the piercing thoughts is a flat percentage spell penetration. This thing allows for a huge diversity in your build paths. So for example, with the introduction of this is also really important, with the introduction of a lot of AD tailored items. So for example, you have Death's Dance, you have the reworked Hydras, the Titanic and the Ravenous, respectively. You have stuff like the reworked Trinity Force with the 20% down from up from 10% bonus crit strike chance. You have stuff like the Essence Reaver. So basically, in this current meta, there are champions who are not naturally tanky, and these champions will be further incentivized to go without a tanky item simply because there are so many choices of AD orientated items, right? So for example, if you have on the enemy team something like a Jax, something like a Fiora on the top lane, they will be more incentivized to go with full damage. Jax in this situation goes with something like a Gwynsus Rageblade, something like even the Gunblade, something like a Trinity Force. So he's not going to be that incentivized to go full tank. And up until the 3rd item included, he's probably going to go full damage. So you will have a really good mid-game spike with this one, with the piercing thoughts. And it's going to help you out a lot, considering the fact that there's a small nerf to the magic resist items as far as I know. Prices have been slightly increased as well, so that even further incentivizes bruisers and fighters in general to not pick them up and go for full damage and sustain. And the other really important thing is that in this meta, basically HP, flat HP, has been the best source of defense since forever. For example, if you build full armor or if you build full magic resist, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good without HP. So mainly your enemies are going to build pure HP as a first defensive item. And this just helps you tremendously because, for example, they will not be building any magic resist items. And how this ties in, this is very important, how this ties in with the current meta shift is, this gives you a lot of diversity in the builds. So let's take a standard build, for example. Let's take the Morello for the utility of the mana sustain and the cooldown reduction. Let's put a second item, which is pretty much mandatory, a burst item. Let's put something like a Luden Zeko or a Rabadon. So we have a Morello, we have a Rabadon. The third item in a standard build such as this for Season 5 would have been the Void Staff. Now in this situation, considering all the changes of the meta, all of the changes to the introduction of the items, of the new items that incentivize enemies to go full damage, pretty much you will not need a spell penetration item. So that's the whole reason why Piercing Thoughts is so good. It allows for you to delay the acquisition of the Void Staff, if not remove it completely from your build. Depending on what you're playing against. If you're playing against something... okay, so if your team composition is Vlad on the top lane, you as an AP spellcaster on the mid lane, and something like an Eve or Diana in the jungle for even more AP, of course the enemy team is going to be incentivized to build magic resist items. But in this case, unless it's something less than this, less than ideal situation for them to build magic resist items, they will not build them. So the Piercing Thoughts is definitely really good mid-game power spike and a late-game power spike as well. And it pretty much allows you to get something like Morello, Rabadon into a Luden Zeko for insane burst. It allows you to get pure burst in the form of, for example, Rabadon is the first item, Luden Zeko, or the other way around, doesn't really matter, and then finish it off with something like a Rylai's Scepter for the added survival ability and for the added kite as well as chase capabilities. So Piercing Thoughts is definitely really good. It's just a huge game changer in general for AP spellcasters because the lack of power spikes, or rather the delay of power spikes with the increased prices of the AP items currently, kind of gimps their ability to be that effective in the early game. So this somewhat counterbalances that fact, and it really helps you out as an AP spellcaster. And it allows you to have more diversity in your builds. You can get something like the Zonia in place of the Void Staff, which will allow you to have instantaneous defensive capability, which will allow you to make a lot of plays. For example, you can activate the Zonia, put a gravity field under your feet, then just flash away, so your enemies will be pretty much CC'd, your team will follow up, and you will just unleash your combo upon the CC'd enemies. So in this, there's not even a competition. Armor penetration against Piercing Thought is just, this is going to be your basic standard build. Now the final one is really interesting. This one is actually going to get nerfed. It's going to be against champions only if you crit you will heal. So yeah, after the changes to Viktor's Q and it can't crit anymore, you don't really have to get this one. It's not really ideal. The second one, and it's just really counterintuitive to Viktor's playstyle. Although he can utilize the bonus physical damage, he is a short sequence burst mage, so just standing on the sidelines and just trying to get a couple of auto attacks when he doesn't even scale with attack speed, and he's not going to be able to utilize this fully, it's just not anything that you would pick up. So by virtue of these two being sub-ideal or subpar for you, you will just always go with the Deathfire Touch. Now this is really good. It ties really well with the natural talent because it scales both your AD and AP, and if you're going with something like a Gunblade, for example, it's really viable as well. I will of course be making a guide on the Gunblade a bit later. I'm not really sure when, but this is going to be the first step to updating my guide. And I'm just doing a rundown of the most important thing, and that's going to be the masteries so far. So yeah, just by virtue of this being better than all of those for your AP mid lane build, you're just gonna go with the Deathfire Touch. Now, what we have is the Cunning and the Resolve. You already have the natural talent, so we discussed that this is going to replace the last hitting bonuses from the Arcane Blade as well as the Butcher, which has been renamed to Savagery now. Now it's a really tough choice. Between these two, we are basically in a dilemma of whether we should get the Executioner, which has been renamed to Merciless. And it increases, like before, increases your spell damage, your damage overall by 5% on champions below 40% health. So it's a fight between this and the Insight. Now as an AP mid laner, most mid laners, something like an Ahri of course, is not going to need the cooldown reduction on the summoner spells. That's a fact. It will be good for her, but it will not be ideal. It will not be a necessity. Now for something like Viktor, for example, this is a complete must. And the fact that you will have so much outplayability against your opponents means that this greatly trumps the value of the Merciless. There's just no other way around it. Insight is just the go-to for Viktor. Now, the thing about these two is, the Merciless is not really that much necessary. You can go with something like the double-edged sword with the Sorcery combo, and it's going to be more than enough to counterbalance it, at least to a certain extent. Now, what I like about Riot's changes, this is really important. So they have made a really good balance between Utility Masteries and Defensive Masteries. Now this is really important for Viktor, because it solves a lot of problems with his laning against all-in burst assassins and stuff like that. So for example, the added sustain from the Feast as well as the recovery is really good sustain against assassins. This will pretty much allow you to never go low on health if you manage properly the wave clear, and it will reduce the assassination potential of you if you're playing against AD assassins, as well as LeBlanc or something like that. Now, usually I take maybe 1 point so I can have like a bit of a better scaling on my armor as well as magic resist. You don't really need max points on the recovery. You can go at simply 3 to 4 points, and the feast is going to just contribute even further to the sustain. So something like 3 points in the recovery and 2 points in the unyielding, or 4 points in the recovery and 1 point in the unyielding. This is going to be like your standard build. Now the second one, a tough skin is really interesting. Usually you would take the Explorer if you're roaming a bit, but overall the Explorer is better. Now the tough skin is interesting because it's not about the damage that it reduces from champions. Now, if it reduced the damage from minions, and correct me if I'm wrong, this does not reduce the damage from minions. This is pretty much good for the jungler champions as well as the AD carries. The reason why this is not that good on the mid lane is, for example, it doesn't facilitate the all-in capabilities of Viktor. So if you flash in your enemy and you do your full combo, you will get hit a lot by his minions. If this thing reduced damage from minions, it would have been really viable because it would give you a second layer of defense against them, and it will pretty much negate a lot of the incoming damage. Now, in an ideal scenario, you wouldn't even need this. You would just go with the Explorer. It does help out a ton in the late game, where you have to be roaming a lot, where you have to be present for a lot of skirmishes, when you have to be present for a lot of team fights around the Baron Pit, around the Dragon Pit, and so forth. So definitely the Explorer is really nice. It's really good for early invades as well. If you have something like a Blitzcrank, just the Explorer is my go-to in most situations. So now we get to something like the Veteran Scars or the Runic Armor. Now the Runic Armor doesn't really affect you that much. You don't really need it, to be fair. After the changes to the Gunblade, it's more than potent enough to keep you alive most of the time. So you would just go with the Veteran Scars. And the Veteran Scars is really good because later on you can scale it with something like the Rylai Scepter. So for example, you get this thing, and there's a really interesting build that I've been thinking of. So if you're playing against an AD assassin like Zed or like Talon, we've already discussed that the HP, the pure HP, is really good in the early game. So Rod of Ages is actually very viable at the moment. So you have Rod of Ages, you have Rylai's. You have this combo for the first 2 items. If you build this, you will be above 2.5k HP in around 20, 25, 26, 7 minutes if everything is ideal. So there's no way for the enemy assassin to burst you down. Now this is really good because the Rod of Ages price remains the same from just 3k gold, and it gives you a ton of sustain from the Catalyst effect when you level up. It gives you a lot of mana for good management. It gives you a lot of HP for even further scaling of the veteran scars. It gives you a lot of AP for the price. This is really important. So for example, the AP growth of items such as the Luden's Echo or the Zonia has been nerfed from 120 to 100. And this means that down to 100, the 10 stacks on the Rod of Ages is going to be more valuable than the AP of the Luden's Echo or the Zonia, for example. Even though it does not provide the utility of those items, it will give you a plethora of other abilities as well. It will give you a lot of tankiness, it will give you a lot of mana to manage for extended siege scenarios. It will be really good, and it's really cheap. It's only 3k. So something like a Rylai's as well as a Rod of Ages would be really viable with the veteran scars, even though you don't really need it, but I'm just saying that it can be really viable. Simply because you will be able to act when you're getting nuked down. So for example, the Zonia will just lock you down. It will give your enemy a lot of time to reposition. It will give your enemy a lot of time to just make more plays on you. With the Rod of Ages and with the Rylai combo, you will be able to stay mobile, you will be able to stay in the fight and unleash even more damage against your enemy, and most likely their burst at that point will not be enough to bring you down. Of course in the late game, of course it will be enough, and you will have to replace the Rod of Ages with something else. But so far the veteran scars have proved to be a part of the standard build. So we're down at the final stretch of the standard build. This is going to be the insight. There's not even any debate here. Perseverance, although it's good, it's not ideal because it brings you down to the effects are only available if you're below 20% health, and that's really risky. You shouldn't really stay that much. You're risking like burning your flash in most situations, which is really important for you to actually engage on the enemy rather than escape. So the insight is just the go-to. This is the main thing that you, the main reason that you actually chose the resolve page in the first place. So overall, these are the talents from the standard build, and this is what you're going to go with most of the time. Again, you can swap stuff like the Feast and Double-Edged Sword if you're playing against a survival control lane. You may or may not want to try the Rod of Ages with the Rylai's, but this is pretty much going to be your standard build for every game. Again, I'm really happy with the Piercing Thoughts changes. It allows for a lot of diversity. It's really good. The tie-in, the mesh between the defensive as well as the utility masteries is really nice. Then yeah, this is pretty much going to be your standard build. Now the second build that I wanted to cover was very interesting, and it's still a bit experimental, but it's definitely viable. We were going to be returning all these points, and what we will be doing is, since you don't really need the Savagery, we will be going with the Wanderer 5 points. We will be going with the Secret Stash, which is really good now. Now with the introduction of the Corrupting Potion, you have a potion that increases your damage based on the duration. So for example, you have a bonus burning damage, magical damage, the more the potion stays on you. So for example, this thing increases the duration of your potions, so you have 1 or 2 seconds more window of an opportunity to unleash even more damage on the enemy, as well as converting your potions into biscuits in the first place. If you're of course not going with the corrupting potion. Now the second one, of course, there's not even a debate here. You're gonna go with the Merciless, a really powerful mastery. The only thing that pretty much sways you to go for this talent page, and not for something like the Insight on the Resolve. This would be really good, for example, for an Ahri. Ahri on the mid lane would benefit greatly from this. Something like a Zeraf was really going to benefit from this as well, since he does unleash the majority of the damage from the ulti when enemies are already below 40% HP, so it's going to scale really well with him. And yeah, that's pretty much going to be it. Meditation is really good. The problem is that if you manage your mana properly, and if you get something like the Morello, or you don't really even need the meditation at this point. With the changes to the Doran's Ring, the Doran's Ring doesn't give you flat mana every couple of seconds. It gives you a percentage of your mana regeneration. So if you have 2 Doran's Rings, for example, even one is enough with proper mana management. If you have 2 Doran's Rings or 1 Doran Ring, it will increase the mana regeneration by percentages. So even though the meditation is really powerful, you don't need it in the long run, and the damage is just going to outshine in the late game, and that's all there is to it. So this is pretty much tailored for support heroes. You don't really need this one. Dangerous Game is going to be something that's going to be really beneficial for you. Now, Dangerous Game is really good because in most scenarios, you will be fighting someone with Ignite on the mid lane. I'm talking about Ari, I'm talking about Zed, Talon, pretty much like all of the assassins, the mobility mage is someone that can burst you down. Now this is really good, because after the fight, if you outburst them, and if you actually win the fight, this will negate 1 to 2 ticks of the Ignite. 1.5 to 2 ticks of the Ignite if I'm not mistaken. So Dangerous Game is definitely going to be much better from something that's barely usable by you. And it will help you a lot if you're going all in against someone. Of course, this is very situational. Most of the time you will not make full use of it. So I wouldn't really rely on it that much, but it is a nice thing to have overall. Now the intelligence is the go-to for this particular tier. Just armor and magic penetration, although it's good, you will mainly be getting spell damage, so magic penetration will be the best that you want. It goes up to 0.3 per level, which is not that bad, but in general the intelligence is really nice, and this is going to be your bread and butter for this one. Increases your cooldown reduction by 5%, and it also increases the cap of your cooldown reduction by 5%. Now, I would see this to be achievable only with something like cooldown reduction boots, which are pretty much a must nowadays, because it reduces the cooldown of your summoner spell. So cooldown reduction boots on Viktor in particular are a must, in conjunction with something like the Insight, as well as the Distortion. So yeah, this will be pretty much achievable only with the cooldown reduction boots. A Morello on top of scaling cooldown reduction runes on the blues, so it's going to be pretty hard to achieve, but in general it is better than the hybrid penetration from the precision. So just go with the intelligence, it's pretty decent. It gets you up to 15% cooldown reduction with the boots of lucidity, which have been slightly nerfed. They are more accessible now because the price is lower, but in general, the cooldown reduction from the lucidity is nerfed down from 15 to 10%, so you would definitely want to get a bit more cooldown reduction in general. Now, this is really interesting. I found that the Thunderlord's Decree is somewhat unreliable. Now, the interesting thing about the Thunderlord's Decree is that if you're playing Viktor, for example, the second explosion, the aftershock, the effect of your death ray, the augmented death ray, actually applies a second stack to this. So for example, if you pop a death ray with double explosions on them, and if you do a Q on them, it will immediately proc the Thunderlord's Decree, which is pretty decent. It's a substantial damage boost. But of course, we will go with something like the Storm Rider's Surge here. The Windspeaker's Blessing is pretty much for support characters at this point. Storm Rider's Surge is really cool because it facilitates Viktor's playstyle. So for example, Viktor is all about short sequence burst. You just unleash your full combo and you take someone's HP down to pretty insignificant numbers. And if you're not running Ghost, this is going to be very beneficial because it will help you out with the mobility along with your Q augmentation. So this is going to be really powerful if you're not running Ghost, for example. If you are running Ghost, then you have that movement speed on demand along with the distortion. It's going to scale it up even further. So if you're running Ghost, this is not really ideal because you will already be at 70% movement speed with the Q augment and the distortion Ghost. So Storm Rider Surge is definitely not that good. Now, this is really an unreliable talent tree because you have to make a very huge sacrifice here. So you're going either for damage or you're going for utility with the Insight. Now, we already discussed how important the Insight is.
I am the inventor been a mentor. Join as my acolyte and I will be your mentor. Science will destroy you, it will build you anew. The gifts I offer now, eternal power, a new point of view.
Alright, Bazil77, thank you for the follow, my friend. If you have any questions, I will answer them after this, so yeah. But yeah, thank you for the follow, dude. Welcome to the Church of Explanations. Alright, so where were we? Oh yeah, so we're in a really tight spot between a rock and a hard place, as they say. So we're going either for the utility, which will of course not be the case. We will be forced to go with a bit more damage because we're just sacrificing too much damage at this point. So of course we're going with the sorcery, we're going with maybe the double-edged sword because at this point we really need it. Going with the natural talent as always, and going with either the oppressor or the bounty hunter. Let's take the oppressor in this situation. So this is going to be your standard build if you're going with something like the Storm Rider Surge or the Thunderlord's Decree. If you want to go with something which is more defensive oriented, of course you're going to get the sustain from here. You're going to get the Explorer, you're going to get the Veteran Scars, and of course you're going to get the Insight. So these are basically your standard builds, 3 builds that are really viable right now. I would wager that the most viable build is 18 Ferocity into a 12 Resolve, which is going to look something like this. You can choose between these two, it doesn't really matter depending on the enemy that you're facing. So natural talent, you're gonna get the bounty hunter or oppressor, it doesn't really matter, just for color, for the contrast here I'm gonna take the oppressor. Piercing Thoughts into a Deathfire Touch, you're going to take 4 points into the sustain or 3 points depending if you have the feast or not. 1 point or 2 points in the unyielding, you're going to take the Explorer, and then you're going to take the Veteran Scars into the Insight. Now this is pretty much going to be your basic build for this season, or until they change the masteries, and that's pretty much going to be it. Can I think of something else? I'm not really sure. I think I covered the meta shift and the way that that the Piercing Thoughts is going to interact with the enemies, and the way they build. So I'm guessing this is pretty much it. So thank you for watching. This is going to be the first of a couple of videos, and I will be making a runes and most likely a Gunblade video explaining on why you actually can make the Gunblade really viable, depending on a lot of factors, ranging from the changes to the prices on the AP items, ranging from the changes to the AP items power themselves, depending on the meta shift, depending on the way you lane against assassins and the assassin meta, the way that the Gunblade actually scales. So there's a lot of factors that make the Gunblade actually really powerful. And I haven't even gotten into half of them, but I will be discussing this in a future video. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter or on my stream. I will be putting links in the description. And yeah, thank you for watching. Look forward to another video soon. Have a good one.